Okay, so this week we're going to learn about William the Conqueror in the Battle of Hastings, and we're going to tie him in with a lot of the recent events and people that we've been studying. So we're going to start with Alfred the Great, okay? And after Alfred died, the kings who followed had to keep fighting off Viking invasions. Alfred's son Edward was a strong and fierce leader who protected his kingdoms and even took some of the northern parts of England back from the Vikings. But the kings after Edward were not as successful. 200 years after Alfred's death in the year 1013, his descendant Ethelred was defeated by a Viking named Sweyn Forkbeard. Okay, so this Viking was named Sweyn Forkbeard, and he had a very long and bushy beard, which he wore in two braids like a fork, and he became the king of England. And Ethelred, who had to flee to Normandy, France, got his own nickname. He was called Ethelred the Unready because he wasn't able to keep the Vikings away. So after Sweyn Forkbeard, the descendants of the Vikings ruled England for many years. Okay, so here you see England in red, okay, and France is actually right down below it here. So you had the Normans from France, and then we have England here where Alfred was the king, okay? So after Sweyn Forkbeard, the descendants of the Vikings ruled England for many years. But all the time the children of the Vikings and the children of the Anglo-Saxons were living side by side, trading with each other and marrying each other, England was becoming a mix of Anglo-Saxon and Viking, and the English stopped thinking of themselves as Vikings or Anglo-Saxons. They were just English. So there was a lot of confusion for a while. Well, who are we? Are we English? Are we Anglo-Saxon? Are we Viking? And they finally decided, yes, we're the English. We are our own thing. But soon a whole new race of warriors would invade England, and the trouble began when Edward the Confessor, who ruled England for over 20 years, began to get old. He had no son, so his advisors decided that a nobleman named Harold should be the next king of England after Edward's death. Harold was a strong fighter with soldiers of his own who were loyal to him, and he was from Wessex, which was just like King Alfred. Remember, Alfred the Great was King of Wessex, excuse me. But Edward's distant cousin William thought that he should inherit the English throne. William wasn't even English. He was French, and he lived in Normandy, France, the French kingdom of the Vikings. But when William was married to an English princess, he was related to the king. He protested that he should be Edward's heir, but the English advisors refused to listen. They didn't want a Norman ruler. One day, William heard a startling piece of news. Harold was sailing along the coast of Wessex and had been caught in a storm and blown off course. So his ship had been driven by the winds all the way across the water between England and France and had wrecked on the shores of Normandy. William went down to the shore and rescued Harold from the wreckage. He took Harold up to his castle, gave him dry clothes and a place to sleep, and he planned a huge feast in his honor for the next night. At the feast, Harold was seated on a dais, a raised platform for an honored guest, and he was surrounded by tables draped with scarlet and gold cloths. They were covered with meat and drinks, and there were jugglers and there were acrobats there to entertain him. But Harold was nervous. He knew that William wanted to be Edward's heir, and even though William was acting friendly, Harold was in William's castle with the doors locked. So sure enough, at the end of the feast, William asked Harold to put his hands flat on the table and to swear to give William the English throne. Harold was afraid to defy William in his own castle, so he put his hands on the table and he swore the oath. But then William whipped the tablecloth away. He kind of pulled a dirty trick. The table that Harold had sworn an oath on had sacred relics. It was actually a box with bones of saints, and saints' remains were thought to have miraculous powers, so it was kind of a sacred deal. Now he was bound to keep his promise that he made to William. So William finally let Harold go back to England, and several years later, in 1066, Edward the Confessor died. Uh-oh. So now here we go. Who's going to be king? Is it going to be Harold or is it going to be William? So at once William sent messengers to Harold, demanding that Harold honor his sacred promise. But Harold refused. "I will be King of England," he declared. So the English noblemen held a grand ceremony to make Harold king. But they were nervous. A bad omen hovered on the horizon. That omen was called Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet comes around every 76 years, but the English didn't know this. All they knew was that a giant light was moving through the sky, and they were sure that this light had some terrible meaning. "Over England," one monk wrote, "is a sign in the skies such has never been seen before." Sure enough, just as Harold was crowned, bad news came. William and his army were ready to attack. So William had prepared carefully for his invasion, and he landed his army far away from Harold's army so that Harold would have to march a long way to face him. By the time Harold's soldiers arrived to fight William, they were exhausted. Harold had pushed them so quickly that many soldiers had been left along the way, but William's army was fresh and ready to fight. So Harold knew that his army needed a rest, and they camped for the night on a hill. He thought that William would wait for him to come down rather than trying to climb up the hill to fight. But William decided that he would launch an attack, even though the fighting uphill was very difficult. He told his troops, "Now is the time to show strength and courage. You fight not only for victory, but for survival." The Normans charged up the hill towards the English camp, and the most famous battle in English history, the Battle of Hastings, had begun. At first, the Norman attack seemed doomed to failure. The English army fought ferociously, and the Norman force began to weaken. William was knocked off his horse, and his soldiers began to shout, "The king is dead! The king is dead!" But William struggled to his feet, yanked his helmet off, and shouted, "I'm still alive! I'm still alive! And by the grace of God, I will still conquer." The relieved Norman soldiers threw themselves back into the battle. They surrounded the English army and overwhelmed it. Harold was killed, and the English surrendered. So Harold was buried in purple robes with the name Harold the Unfortunate carved onto his tombstone. But William was given a new name too. William the Conqueror. He became the new King of England, and his fighters, who were French-speaking descendants of Vikings, were given land and castles in England. Once more, England had been invaded and conquered by a foreign people. So after William the Conqueror became King of England in 1066, the Normans poured into England and changed it forever. They changed the way the English lived. They changed the way the English built houses. They changed the way they farmed their land. And they even changed the way the English people spoke. And you studied this last week, okay? They brought the feudal system with them. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But the English that you hear in the language that you speak right now is a mix of several different languages. English is a little bit like a greedy friend who keeps taking your toys. So imagine that your greedy friend sees your Play-Doh and decides that she wants it. And after all, her Play-Doh is all brown and mixed up with other colors. So she takes your nice clean orange and your nice clean green, and she mixes it with her own Play-Doh. And after a little while, you can't tell the Play-Doh apart. All of the Play-Doh has become hers. Well, that's the way the English language has kind of worked out. Wherever English speakers heard a useful word in another language, they would just take it and mix it in with all of their other English words. And soon, that word would become English. The very first English was the language spoken by the barbarian Angles and the barbarian Saxon tribes when they invaded England long ago. This Old English was very different from modern English, and it even used different letters. Old English looks very strange to us, but we can recognize a few words. But when the Anglo-Saxons came to speak, or when the Anglo-Saxons came, speaking the Old English, they drove the Celts away from England and drove them into Ireland. So you can see England here, and they drove the Celts away into Ireland over here. Okay, all of this map today that you're seeing is part of the United Kingdom today. That it was not yet the United Kingdom then. Okay, so you can ignore this United Kingdom flag, because right now we're just talking about how the Celts were driven out of England and into Ireland. Okay, so, and they were also driven into Scotland and Wales, which you can also see here in red and purple on this map. Okay, and the Celtic language went with all of these to England, Scotland, or excuse me, to Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. So today the Celtic language is still spoken in those three areas, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. The Angles and Saxons spent very little time talking to the Celts, so English did not borrow very many words from the Celtic language. But English did borrow plenty of words from Latin and from Greek. And do you remember who came to England after the Anglo-Saxons? We've studied him, but it was way at the beginning. St. Augustine. St. Augustine came bringing Christianity with him, and when Christianity came to England, so did Latin and Greek words. The monks and priests who taught the Anglo-Saxons about Christianity also taught them Greek words like apostle, angel, baptize. The Anglo-Saxons had no words for these Christian ideas, so they borrowed the Greek words for them straight from the New Testament. They borrowed even more Latin words. Old English took the Latin words for minister and nun, monk, gospel, sanctified, and dozens more, and they made them English words. And Old English borrowed Latin words that didn't have to do with the church, too, like the word fraternal, which means brotherly in English. The Latin word for brother is frater. Maternal means motherly. So can you guess what the Latin word for mother is? Well, I know you know it, thanks to Miss Cowlishaw and all your wonderful Latin studies. The Latin word for mother is mater. So by now, English had words from at least 3 other languages in it. But then another invasion came, the Viking invasion. The Vikings brought plenty of words with them from Scandinavia, and most of these words are short, plain, simple words: leg, skin, skull, angry, cut, crawl, die, drown. They're all Scandinavian words. Angry, die, and drown actually sound like words that Vikings would use a lot. So are hungry, weak, egg, steak, and dirt. And the days of our week are named after Viking gods, like Tyr, the warrior god, had Tuesday named after him. Or Odin, the king of the gods, is also called Woden, so Wednesday is named after him. Friday is named after Odin's wife Frigg, and Thursday is named after Thor, the short-tempered thunder god. So I'm not sure if you knew that the days of our week derived from Viking Scandinavian words that kind of depicted some of their mythological gods. So when William the Conqueror and his noblemen settled in England, now you see England in green, the English went through the greatest change of all. You see, Harold, the unfortunate, had spoken English, but after he died, the French-speaking kings ruled England for almost 300 years. You see France there in the orangish yellow. Now we have a major change going on in England, because now the French are coming in and bringing all of their French culture and language. So French was spoken by all of the rich and important people in England, and by all of the educated people, the doctors, the lawyers, the scientists. Most of the common people went right on using English, but they borrowed French words from the Normans, and the Normans married Englishmen and women, and they brought up English children, and they began to speak English. So peace, curtsy, beef, chair, curtain, garden, castle, judge, jury, honor, courage, and rich are all French words borrowed from the Normans. English still borrows words from Latin, French, and other languages today. And in the 20th century, English needed a word to describe something new, a movie that you could watch on your own television. Do you know what word we borrowed? Video, the Latin word for I see. All right. So, before the Normans came, remember the Normans were the French, okay? English people lived in small villages, kind of like this one in this picture. Each family farmed its own little piece of land. Each village had a big open area called the common ground, where every family could put sheep, cows, or pigs out to pasture. Each village had its own sheriff or police officer who made sure that the law was kept. And when there was fighting to be done, the farmers of England banded together to do it. And the King of England was their war leader. Sorry for my shaky video here. But the King of England would lead them into battle against invaders. But William the Conqueror had different ideas. And William thought that the king was more than just a war leader. Instead, William believed that the king owned the land that he ruled. So, when William was crowned king, he claimed all the land of England as his own, and he gave his favorite knights, the ones who had fought for him in the Battle of Hastings, pieces of England for their own. In exchange for this land, the knights had to promise to give William, the king, money to keep his army strong and to serve in William's army whenever he called them to come and join him in a fight. The wealthy knights who settled down on those pieces of land were called lords. They were noblemen, and they gave smaller parts of their land away to other knights who would fight for them, and they gave parts of land to English farmers. Those were called peasants and serfs. In exchange for these little farms, the peasants had to promise to give part of everything they raised to their lord. So the peasants gave the lords food, and the lords gave the peasants land. The lords gave the knights land, and the knights promised to serve the lords. The lords gave the king service in his army and paid him taxes, and the king gave the lords land and castles. And this, you know, was a way of living called feudalism, or the feudal system. Every person in England served someone else, and the person that they served had a duty to give them back something in exchange. So feudalism was a Norman way of life. It was a French way of life. And after the Norman invasion, it became an English way of life as well. So what would your life be like if you were a peasant or a serf? You would spend your days caring for animals. You would work in the fields. You would harvest fruit and nuts. You would mend harnesses. You would make tools out of wood and iron. You would tend beehives. Every week you would send some of your animals, vegetables, fruit, nuts, honey to the castle for the Lord and his family. And the Lord who owns your land can't ever force you to leave. You have the right to live there for the rest of your life. You live in a house with one room. The walls are made out of mud and twigs, and the roof is made out of bundles of straw called thatch. The dirt floor is spread with straw too, with a fireplace right in the middle of it and a hole cut in the roof to let the smoke out. Your bed is a pile of leaves near the fire. Your whole family sleeps in it with you. So do your pigs and your chickens. Yes, your pigs and chickens slept with you in your house. They are too valuable to leave outside at night, so you bring them into the house when it gets dark. You don't get to eat meat very often unless you can catch fish from the stream nearby, but you have plenty of vegetables, lots of grain, which you make into gruel. It's kind of like a runny oatmeal, and heavy dark loaves of bread. And in the summer, there's honey from your beehives and apples, blackberries, and walnuts from the trees and the bushes that grow around your village. Now, imagine that you live in a lord's family. You live in a huge stone house, a castle. Its bright embroidered hangings called tapestries cover the stone walls of your rooms, and rugs make the cold floor warm. Lavender, rosemary, and other sweet herbs lie on the floor. When you step on them, good smells rise up. You spend most of your time in the largest room of the castle, which is called the Great Hall, where logs burn on a huge fireplace and oil lamps line the walls. Your meals start with turnip and parsnip soup, chicken broth, or onion and leek soup. For a main course, you might eat beef, pork, eel, pigeon, along with vegetables, salads of flower petals, fruits, cheeses, breads, plenty of wine. And your cook spends hours making the food look as good as it tastes. Okay? He makes cakes shaped like castles with little flags flying from the towers. He has bread carved into warships, floating on gravy seas. He has pies topped with crust that often open up so that songbirds can fly out. And boar intestines, yummy. Dried fruit carved into long strips with raspberry sauce piled under the stomach of a tiny pastry boar. Doesn't that sound appetizing? But the point is they ate a whole lot better than the serfs and peasants who did all the work. Your feast would last for hours, with musicians, jugglers, acrobats, and jesters performing for you while you eat. And on special occasions, you would eat off silver plates, but usually you would eat your food off a huge slice of hard bread that soaks up all the extra grease. And you use your knife and your fingers to eat because forks have not been invented yet. So you have a good life, okay? And this is a life of nobility. It's the lords and ladies, the barons and baronesses, the dukes and duchesses, the courtiers, all the people who could be in line to be the next lord of the manor, or possibly even royalty one day, a prince or princess or king or queen if the family king-queen dynasty were to end, okay? So you have a very good life, but all the while, if you're a lord who rules the manor, you are actually probably hoping that no foreign armies are going to invade England. Because if they do, you will have to leave your very comfortable castle, strap on your armor, and head off to war, because that was how the lords repay the king. And I didn't erase a subtitle there, but anyways. So now you know a little bit more about feudalism, and you know about William the Conqueror and the Battle of Hastings, and kind of how England is coming to be, okay? And as we're going through the Middle Ages here, England is actually becoming the superpower of the world. But it's going through a lot of turmoil as it's going from one ruling, ruled by the Vikings, then it was ruled by the English for a while, now it's ruled by the Normans. So you can see that it's been a very hard and dark time, which once again is why the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, that's why we're studying them, and it's why the Middle Ages is called the Dark Ages, which is what I was trying to say. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Make sure you do the quick little quiz just to get credit for participating today, and I will see you later.